In this video, we're going to try to make sense of how different research orientations or strategies fit with different types of research goals that you might be pursuing. In the end, you should get an idea of what methods and what approaches you might want to adopt depending on the goals of your research project. So let's just do a quick refresher on research goals. We have talked about these in class, but there are 7 of them. You have your goal of identifying general patterns and relationships, so something that applies broadly and really affects many cases. Then you can test and refine theories that are already out there that might have been suggested by you or somebody else. Then you might want to make predictions about the future to help make decisions about the future ultimately. Then you might want to interpret phenomena that are culturally or historically significant. Then you might want to explore diversity and divergent patterns within the more broad, more general patterns. You might want to go into research with the goal of giving voice to your participants. Or you might want to find new evidence that will help you advance new theories, or perhaps create the very new theories from scratch. And then there are also 3 research orientations. So you have quantitative research orientation or strategy, which basically in this case you're going to have many cases. So in sociology we often deal with people, with individuals, so we have thousands and hundreds of thousands, well, if we're lucky. We have many cases, but the scope of information on each case is generally pretty limited. And then you're going to have qualitative research, which is quite the opposite of that, because although you have relatively few cases, you want to gather rich data on each of the cases, so you really want to develop a deep understanding of what you're studying. And then you have comparative research, which is a little bit of both. You have some number of cases, you have some degree of depth in your data, but really your focus is on the differences between the cases you're comparing them. Well, with us, it's called comparative research, right? So there's that, and of course you can make it a mixed methods project and mix and match the orientations or strategies, and you can do that by using them subsequently or by using them concurrently. Alright, so we have 7 goals and we have 3 major kinds of research orientations. Now, what do you think? Which orientation will work best for the goal of identifying general patterns and relationships? Okay, how about for the goal of interpreting culturally or historically significant phenomena? Now that you had a moment to think about this, we are going to try to match the strategies to the goals, and you can see whether your intuition was right. Alright, so we're going to look at each of the goals separately, and we're going to see how well do the different approaches match that goal, how well they fit the goal. So our first goal is identifying general patterns and relationships. So the key word here is general. We want a lot of cases. We want the patterns that we find and relationships that we find to apply across the board. I'm not going to say we want them to be universal, because that virtually never happens, especially in social sciences. But we want generalizability. So, of course, the natural choice here is quantitative research strategy, because that one is all about collecting a lot of cases. And although you might not have a lot of data on each case, the sheer number of cases allows you to tease out things that apply to very many of them, to most cases at the same time, or at least a reasonable number of cases. And then comparative research may also work here, but that largely depends on kind of the level at which you're looking at for the patterns. So, I mean, if there is not a ton of variation, you suspect, in your data, so if you're looking at a specific set of countries, and a lot of my examples for comparative has to do with countries, because comparative research is very commonly used in political science or political sociology type of research, which I don't do, but that doesn't mean I cannot talk about it. So comparative research may work here, but really quantitative would be your go-to. And then similar things happen with theory testing, because you want your theory to be generalizable. And for a theory to be generalizable, which means for it to apply to as many cases, as many scenarios, as many situations as possible, well, we want to analyze many cases and many scenarios and many situations. Now, there are, of course, theories that exist at a lower level of abstraction, and that are just not grand, and they're not meant to be very general in that sense. So for some cases, you might want to go with qualitative and comparative, or qualitative or comparative approaches. But your first thought should probably be quantitative if testing theory is a goal that you're after. Now, to make predictions, or at least to make predictions with a certain degree of confidence, you again want to turn to quantitative research. Because when you make predictions, you're essentially extrapolating from existing data. And the more data points you have, the better. And again, sometimes comparative works. And again, in political studies, when we're predicting a political or economic trajectory of a country. So, for example, if we were to take 3 countries in Eastern Europe, which is not very many, but let's say we take Poland, Ukraine, and Belarus. And they're similar in many ways. They're similar economically. They are similar culturally to some extent. But their political trajectories are very different, so by looking at political trajectories of Belarus and political trajectories of Poland, we might want to be able to make some predictions about political trajectory of Ukraine. So in cases like this, comparative research is probably a good idea. But generally, if we're predicting population growth in Utah or something like that, we want many data points. We want as many data points as we can possibly get. Then when it comes to interpreting phenomena that are significant culturally or historically, the things change, and the qualitative research becomes the most appropriate strategy because, well, these phenomena are by definition unique. You're not going to have very many revolutions. And probably each one of them is going to be very different from all the others. Although they will share some characteristics. But essentially those are unique phenomena, and qualitative approach with its attention to detail and with its deep understanding of the data and of the cases, that will really help you understand and interpret these phenomena better. Again, comparative research is very versatile and can also be used here in special cases. You could compare multiple revolutions or multiple historical transformations of any kind and come up with some kind of interpretation of the phenomenon. You could find some commonalities, let's say for revolutions that happen in Africa or Eastern Europe or Western Europe or Latin America or in the same country at different points of time. When you're trying to explore diversity, which is our next goal, that's where comparative really stops being your backup kind of plan and becomes your primary mode of operation, so to say, because, well, the very definition of comparative research strategy is to look for differences, look for, well, diversity between your cases, look for patterns and divergent patterns. So really, this type of research will help you flesh out diversity between your cases the most. Qualitative will work on small scale, quantitative will work on large scale. They both provide you some amount of insight into your cases, into your data, so they can be good enough. But again, with qualitative, you might have too small of a scale. With quantitative, you might have too little of the depth in your data. But comparative just kind of hits the sweet spot. Although, again, I think that my own research does have, at least to some extent, a goal of exploring diversity, because I look at different immigrant groups. But I do it through purely quantitative methods. Although I do plan to adopt some comparative, maybe, in the future. So see, that still applies. I still feel like comparative research might be a better fit if I indeed want to pursue this goal. Then your goal of giving voice to somebody, well, not just to somebody, but to your participants, that's a very unique one, and that one can be reached almost exclusively through the use of qualitative methodologies. Because only the qualitative approach allows you to get close to your data and close to your participants and really get at the point where you can see the phenomena from the participants' points of view. You get to really understand what their voice is. And that's kind of a prerequisite to trying to give voice or try to make it heard or use your institutional power that you very often have as a researcher, as an academic, as a professional, well, as somebody who people listen to make the voices of your participants who may be marginalized and who may be in relatively lower social positions compared to you as a researcher. You want to make their voices heard, and first you need to know what their voices and what their perspectives are, and qualitative is the way to do that and the way to learn about that. Then finally, to advance new theories, really any approach will do. Quantitative approach will work not as well as qualitative and comparative. And the reason for that is because quantitative is really good at identifying the general patterns. So testing an existing theory is perfect because, well, we kind of know what we expect to find. But if we're advancing new theories, we kind of want to be ready for the unexpected. And unexpected comes out better when we're dealing with the qualitative or comparative methodologies. So quantitative is kind of not, well, it's really a downside of not having very rich data on each of your cases, because you might be missing the data that would help you advance new theories, come up with new ideas, develop new theories perhaps. So, and actually it's not uncommon to have mixed methods projects in which you start out with a qualitative pilot, so you do a focus group of some sort where you're trying to come up with ideas and kind of new theoretical or less theoretical developments, and then to try to test and generalize the ideas that you just came up with. You employ some kind of quantitative method, such as, for example, a survey. Alright, so this is our complete table of research goals and how they match up with different research strategies or orientations. As you see, there is a clear distinction between which goals can be best reached with qualitative methodologies and which goals work best with quantitative methodologies. And then the comparative, since it's a little bit of both, it has some advantages of both qualitative and quantitative, as well as some disadvantages of each. Well, that one is really versatile. It works to some extent virtually for any of the research goals you might have, with the exception of trying to give voice to your participants. But that's a very special goal. So hopefully this helps you try and figure out how certain research goals that you might have in mind in your future research that you might do, how those goals can be reached. Or perhaps if you are reading somebody else's research study, you might try to see whether their choice of methods was indeed ideal for the goals they are stating.